sinful nature in humans. So I'm coming from a Protestant Reformed kind of paradigm. I'm making my way out of that. So I was just wondering, how far is that from the Eastern Orthodox understanding?
It's very far. Yeah, this is one of the first things that you need to get out of your head is the idea that natures are evil. So God is the creator of everything that exists. Natures exist, essences exist. God gives those essences being. Sin and evil do not have being. They are not things. They are privations, and they are moves of the will away from the good. They are not a state. There's no such thing as a state of sin or a state of being that is evil. This is Patristics 101, Patristic Metaphysics 101. And so it's never correct to say that there is a sinful nature per se. Nature is good. Sin is an act of the will against the good or against the divine law. If you read the book of James, James says that desires themselves are not sin, but when they're consented to by the will, they become sin and give birth to death. So the desires are not sin. I saw Doug Wilson the other day saying that concupiscence is sin. That's a stupid Calvinist position. No, the desires themselves are not sin. Sin is an act of the will. So when you consent to the violation of the divine law, that is a sin. Natures don't sin. Persons sin when they act by will against the divine law. So there's no such thing as a state of sin. When we talk about the state of corruption that we inherit from Adam, that is the deprivation of grace that we inherit as a consequence of Adam's sin, not the guilt of Adam's sin and not Adam's personal sin. So that's the distinction. That's why Mary in Orthodox theology is sinless, but she has the consequences of Adam's sin. So Mary proves the distinction between Adam's sin and the guilt of Adam's sin. Adam has guilt for Adam's sin. We have the effects of Adam's sin. We don't have the guilt of Adam's sin. I have guilt when I commit personal, actual sin.
Okay.
And that is Orthodox Theology 101, and all the 20-year-olds on Twitter that don't know this are just simply wrong and don't know what they're talking about. And they're confused over terms.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that a lot more. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also, this is more of a experiential notion, but because coming out of the paradigm, I just want to ask you, so what, because when you're sitting in a Protestant church, or you'll hear Reformed people say that a baby is a viper in a diaper, kind of like these dumb little sayings, but essentially they're saying that when your baby takes stuff from you or hits you, that's the sinful nature showing itself. So
again, yeah, we inherit a corrupted, what's called concupiscence. But to sin requires the conscious action of the will to do so. And that's why even Isaiah says, before the child knows to choose the good over the evil, that means there is an age of choice where we come to know the difference between good and evil. Yes, infants have inherited that concupiscence, but that itself is not sin. Sin is you're only guilty when you have committed an action that you're consciously acting against the divine will. There's no such thing as a state of sin. Because again, are we Manichaeans or are we Christians? Because it says in Genesis that God created everything good. So do you think that God created an evil nature in babies? So does God create evil?
Right, yeah.
That would be Manichaeanism. Yeah. The Manichaeans said that there is an evil essence or nature that exists, and it's in contrary duality for all eternity in a dialectical opposition to the good principle. We're not Manichaeans. When God created everything, he said it is good, even the natures that he created. Good questions, though. Yeah.
And what's the definition of concupiscence, or the word that you said?
Yeah, that's the Latin term for the passions. So they mean the same. When the Orthodox Church talks about the passions, that means the disordered desires that we inherit as a result of the fall. Not all of the desires are evil or disordered. For example, the desires themselves are fine. The sexual desire, nothing wrong with the biological desire to reproduce. But it becomes sin when I consent to it outside of the appropriate ways to do it. That's when it's sin. So eating. There's nothing wrong with eating. It's a natural desire. But the desire to overeat and to make that into a pleasurable luxury of gluttony, that's the sin. It's the disordered desire, not the desire itself. Calvinism is predicated on saying that the desire itself is sin. So God, who gives us our desires, which are a faculty or an aspect of our nature, God gives us a sinful nature in their view when they're consistent. And Luther is even more consistent, says absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I feel like you put words to things that have been in my mind and in my heart.
Yeah. So people in the chat are asking about Isaiah 45. So in the Old Testament, the word evil is used in multiple senses. It doesn't always mean just moral actions against the divine law. Sometimes evil can be used for a force of nature, a hurricane, right? That's right. Not the same thing as me committing adultery with Bathsheba, like David did or something, right? So that's a difference. So when Isaiah says, I create evil, he's talking about I bring chastisement through these kinds of natural phenomena. It is not saying that I create a substance of evil like the Manichaeans and the Gnostics said.
Okay.